it's not just Jews who preserve their culture, I mean, more kind of orthodoxly. It's every immigrant group. So by that I mean they even like have accents that are from their mother tongues. And they preserve like their native cultures a bit more. And I think it's because in Montreal or in Quebec more generally, but specifically Montreal, you have an example of the other.
Hi, this is Phoebe Maltz Bovy. You're listening to The Jewish Angle, a podcast from the Canadian Jewish News. So I have a t-shirt. It says on the t-shirt that it's from 1994. I don't know where I got this t-shirt. All I know is that I call it the Canada shirt. I've had it since before moving to Canada. It has a big maple leaf that's kind of got superimposed on it, a fleur-de-lis. And it says in English in the front, then in French in the back, "My country, Canada, my province, Quebec, what more could one wish?" So in a way, this episode of The Jewish Angle is going to be a close reading of this rather large and probably never so high quality to begin with t-shirt in my t-shirt collection, inspired by the fact that I read a really interesting and well-written and fun essay called How Quebec Taught Me to Love Canada by Michael Inzlicht, who is a research excellence faculty scholar at the University of Toronto. He is a professor in the Department of Psychology and cross-appointed in the Department of Marketing at the Rotman School of Management. Mickey is also a neighbor here in Roncesvalles, Toronto, as well as a past guest on the Bonjour High podcast, as well as a past op-ed contributor at the CJN on our website. Mickey, welcome to The Jewish Angle.
Thanks so much. Oh my God, I feel like we're like, it's like so close. There's so much overlap. I'm surprised you invited me again. It's like disgusting how much overlap there is.
Well, when I first started at the CJN, this was in, I believe, 2022, I did some sort of offhand remark in a column or whatever saying that, like, I thought I was the only Jew in Roncesvalles and got all these emails like, no, there's another. And now it's like to the point that they're opening Hebrew school in Roncesvalles.
I've also discovered this after the op-ed was published in the Canadian Jewish News. Well, first of all, I had a lot of, or a few at least, friends from high school. I went to Jewish high school, Herzliya High School in Montreal. And they contacted me. I'm like, oh, you live in Toronto too? And then, of course, I actually got emails from a number of people I didn't know previously who live in the neighborhood who are Jewish and who resonated with what I had to say. So I, too, was surprised that there are as many Jewish people here as there are.
So I'll just give my own Montreal connection, which is that my maternal grandmother was born in Montreal, grew up in Montreal, moved to the States when she got married, and then lived the rest of her life in the States into her 90s, but never actually got U.S. citizenship, always stayed Canadian, was always kind of like very proud Canadian. Then I completely grew up in the States, and it was just happenstance of my husband's work that I ended up in Canada. But now I feel like this kind of full circle thing happening. So that's my connection to Montreal. So I feel like I know this Montreal Jewish world from this kind of remove. What's yours? What's your connection to Montreal, despite being down the street here in Toronto?
Yeah. Well, so I'm born and raised in Montreal, born in 1972. And that's an interesting date because in 1976, that's when the Parti Québécois was first elected. But 1972 was like, okay, so a few years removed from the Montreal Expo 1967, which is widely considered like the zenith of Montreal's power, cultural power in Canada. People were excited. Famous people were going there. But even in 1967, it was clear that there were political rumblings happening. The Quiet Revolution was in full swing in Quebec, and it was just a matter of time before things started changing politically. So I grew up in that era. 1970s and the 1980s in Montreal. But I also resonate with what you said, how you started with your maternal grandmother feeling a strong connection to Montreal. I, too, have a strong connection to Montreal, and most Jewish people I know from Montreal, just it's in their heart. Montreal's in their heart, even if they've been removed from it generations.
Well, that's something I was recently just at a party where some mutual friends, I was saying something about like Montreal, and this woman was like, "Are you Jewish?" I'm like, "Yeah," and she's like, "So am I," because like we both had this like Montreal heritage, and like it was just this sort of weird thing where Montreal was almost like code for Jewish, which is obviously demographically it can't be. But I want to ask about your piece though, because so you describe that at first as an Anglo-Jewish Montrealer, you had resented the language protection stuff. You had felt you had not been in favor, but that you came around to it as a kind of cultural preservation, right?
Right.
That, you know, French being a minority language in Canada, you know, French Canadian culture, Quebecois culture being, you know, otherwise it would just disappear. But I'm wondering though, so where does this leave Montreal Anglo-Jewish culture? Because is it kind of like, I guess I just to some extent genuinely don't know because I've only visited, but is it kind of a lost world or is it a smaller world? Where is that at now?
So Montreal Jewish Anglo culture or
Yeah, like the
Anglo culture
thing
more
of
generally?
like the thing that exists in New York as Mile End Deli and in a kind of like nostalgic way, but what is it as a living culture?
Yeah. Well, I would say, I mean, maybe I'll just give a little kind of background on some of what you said. So
Hmm.
yeah, I grew up in the 70s and I grew up like, I'm actually not even Anglophone. I am allophone. My mother's is Israeli via Yemen.
Hmm.
I grew up, my first language is Hebrew. So I'm considered allophone in the senses that I have to
Hmm.
figure out. I'm like, oh, I guess I'm neither Anglo or Franco. But most Jews, you know, traditionally are English speaking. That changed with the massive influx of Sephardic Jews, especially from Morocco. A lot of Moroccan Jews in Montreal.
Hmm.
But even Moroccan Jews ended up living in English speaking neighborhoods. So the language of the street where I grew up was English. Jewish, not Jewish. It was English on the street. And we grew up like every other Anglo community in Montreal, feeling besieged, feeling like our enemy was French people, was the Parti Québécois specifically. So the then leader of the Parti Québécois was actually a very charismatic guy named René Lévesque, and we saw him as like our enemy. Um, and it's only much later when I was older and started, you know, having more empathy and you know, escaping the kind of provincialism of which Montreal Jewish community can be provincial, can be insular a little bit. Escaping that and having friends that were not Jewish, I started having friends who were Quebecois. I just started having deep sympathy. Like it's not that different what the Quebecois were fighting for than what Jewish people want. Just self-determination, an ability to be themselves, be their own
Hmm.
culture
Hmm.
in, you know, I don't say their land, but
So
the
yeah,
place they've been
I
for
guess what I'm
hundreds of
wondering
years.
though is like, was the Anglo-Jewish culture kind of collateral here? You know?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely was. So I mean, as much as I empathize with Quebecois people, and I think I've done the exact same thing if I was Quebecois. I'd agitate for having laws protecting my culture. It didn't leave us feeling good.
Or just, I mean,
We
I'm not even talking about just like sentiments, but like I'm just thinking about where my own family ended up, that like they're not in Montreal anymore, right?
Yes.
And
So the
whether they married in or married out, they are not. Some are in Toronto, most went to the States in one way or another, but yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there was the last set of numbers I saw was about 400,000 Anglophones left Montreal, mostly to Toronto, but I suspect all over Canada, the U.S. as well. You know, of course, that's not all Jews, but many Jews left as well.
Hmm.
Um, and there was a sense of a community being hollowed out, not shrinking a little, but not hugely, but not growing. Certainly not growing. Actually, I just saw actually in the CJN that for the first time in decades, the Montreal Jewish community has grown, not by a lot. I think it's by 50 people, but at least it's not going down.
Yeah, something that's just striking me about this is that like when I was growing up, so this would have been like late 80s into 90s that I would have been hearing about this and aware of it, that like I was born in 1983. I remember thinking of like the Montreal Jewish world as like not quite the lost shtetl, but like something of another time that because the world hates Jews, disappeared. You know what I mean? Like I'm talking about like my sense of this. If you had asked me when I was like 9 how to make sense of this. But then the thing is, what I know now is Francophone Jews exist. And it seems like that's a very different thing. It's not like in Poland of yore, a bunch of, Polish speaking Jews came in and then everything was fine for them. Like it's a very different situation, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Let's not exaggerate. Montreal Jewish community is still large. It's still thriving. But again, I was much more involved in the Montreal Jewish community growing up than I am in the Toronto Jewish community. My sense, though, is that they're quite different, not just in terms of size, but even in terms of denomination. Like I grew up, everyone that I knew and the entire Jewish community, as far as I knew, went to Orthodox synagogues. It was weird. To go to a Reform synagogue, you were weird. The first time I went to a Reform synagogue was for a bat mitzvah, and I thought it was strange that the bat mitzvah woman, was wearing a kippah, that there was a microphone. Like, it was just foreign. And I know in Toronto that wasn't the case. In New York, certainly in the U.S. is not the case.
I think my impression, and here I'm going to be a bit, this is a bit beyond me, but like, I think there is more just reform in the States, right? Just generally, I think like my impression from having conversed with colleagues about this and podcasted with colleagues about this is that like there is just more like traditional Judaism in Canada generally than in the States.
Yes, and I think in Montreal especially, and I have a theory about why that might be.
Go for it.
Yeah, so I think it's not just Jews who preserve their culture. I mean, more kind of orthodoxly, it's every immigrant group. So Greeks are more Greek, Italians are more Italian. By that I mean they even like have accents that are from their mother tongues, and they preserve like their native cultures a bit more. And I think it's because in Montreal or in Quebec more generally, but specifically Montreal, you have an example of the other. You already have two cultures. So you're like, okay, well, I'll just do my thing. Whereas I think in the rest of Canada, certainly in the US, it's just one kind of English culture, and you kind of just assimilate a bit more of certainly a melting pot in the US, but also in the rest of Canada. So as a result, you have, it's just the flavors are a bit different in Toronto for various ethnicities, and Montreal is no exception to that. I mean, Jews are no exception to that, sorry.
Ever since October 7th, 2023, Muslim and Jewish communities in Canada have been torn apart.
I've known you for 20 years. You've been at my house for Shabbat supper, I don't know how many times. And for 1 second, you can't put down your friend and just hold my hand?
We're fed a constant stream of Jews and Muslims talking at each other, about each other, but rarely do we hear them talking to each other.
Why are you doing this? What's the benefit of doing this?
This podcast aims to do something different. I'm Avi Feingold, a rabbi and a writer with the Canadian Jewish News.
I'm Yafa Sakeja, a Canadian-Palestinian entrepreneur and volunteer with the Canadian Friends of Standing Together.
We're sitting down with Jews and Muslims, Israelis and Palestinians from coast to coast and across the political divide, having difficult conversations in good faith.
We are not the Israeli government. Palestinians are not Hamas.
This is the place where we're both supposed to end up, Israeli and Palestinian, Arab and Jewish.
Subscribe to In Good Faith, wherever you listen to podcasts.
So I want to bring up the point of your piece, like the thesis of it, which is about Canadian patriotism and sort of using Quebec and the positivity of that as a model for Canadian patriotism that's not rooted in negativity, but enthusiasm for Canada. So what does that look like, though, in a non-Montreal context?
Maybe just to kind of preface it for those who haven't read my piece, now, today, in 2025, I'm living through the most patriotic time I've ever experienced in Canada. So growing up in Montreal, there was no patriotism to Canada. There was patriotism to Quebec. But like, as I mentioned in the piece, literally Canada Day, July 1st in Quebec is called Moving Day. It is, I don't know why leases expire this time, but literally, but it seems like a quarter of the province moves on July 1st. So Canada Day is a non-event, or a very muted event. It's another excuse to have a holiday, basically. But now, even Quebecers are expressing patriotism towards Canada. They're singing the national anthem before hockey games, which is unheard of. And now in my neighborhood here in Toronto, Toronto, Ontario doesn't have the same, I think, antipathy towards Canada, given the separatist project. But I wouldn't, unless I'm in cottage country, I wouldn't see Canadian flags waving about. I now see them in our progressive neighborhood where, the people took down their Black Lives Matter flag and now it's a Canadian flag. And it's just very odd to see. It's odd for Canadians to be patriotic, at least in my experience. But now in our patriotism, it tends to be a reactive, almost a negative patriotism. It's like, we are Canadian because we're not American. And you'll say, what are you proud of? I'm proud of healthcare. I'm proud of not having guns. I'm proud of, that we get along. You're like, yeah, but France has all those things too, right? Yeah, but the Americans don't. So it's really like a reaction to the Americans. And it makes sense. We're culturally so similar. Culturally, we consume so much American media. It makes sense.
Well, I mean, wouldn't one way be like a best of both worlds type approach? Like, yes, European countries have a lot of these things, but they also have this notion that there's like a sort of nativist xenophobia that Canada, on paper at least, in principle at least, is more like the US of like anybody can be Canadian, know. A little bit less than I would have thought from like when I did the citizenship test and I was reading about, like there's the official booklet you have to read. And it's very much about like, we have this heritage in English, this and, like Christian English and all this. It seemed like a little bit less everybody's equally the thing than maybe if I were the one writing that booklet, I would have designed it differently, but I did not make Canada. I merely live here and I'm Canadian now. But yeah, I mean, I think there is, though, this idea that like you can get the kind of multiculturalism and everybody on a theoretically equal footing thing that you can't get even in the more multicultural parts of Europe, while also maybe not being shot, maybe seeing a doctor, unless it's a specialist, and that may be a longer wait.
So you're right. I mean, I don't know what I never had to do a citizenship test since I've got birthright citizenship. I suspect whoever wrote that is like, that's the official line is, it's clearly like everyone's welcome.
Yeah.
And like, in fact, I remember like being very proud. One thing that I am very proud of is our diversity, and we get along. I mean, I think lately with Israel-Palestine stuff, we're seeing somehow that
we will get to that. We will get to that. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think, what I love most about Toronto is, I've spent years living in New York. I feel you see more integration of groups. You see like a gaggle of teenagers and they're like all colors, all nations, all languages. And I felt in New York, like I would see more, I don't want to say ghettoized, but like it was more separated. At least that's how I felt. I see more mixing here, and I just love that. So that's a real positive. I think we need to cultivate a love of our own culture. I think we need to do that more. Instead of just like running, our best and brightest go, at least in film and TV and movies, they go to the US, and it makes sense. We're like one continent, one language. That's where most of the people, most of the money is. I get that. But there are the occasional, musician, actor, what have you, who stay, and we love them. The Tragically Hip, this band from the 90s, like most Canadians love them, adore them, especially Gord Downey, who sadly died a few years ago. By accident of circumstance, they did not get popular in the US. And I think that has been a net positive for Canadians in the relationship to them. Like they're our special band that only we appreciate.
I came too late to Canada to know them.
Yeah, but it's just like this. But even now, it's played.
Yeah.
Canadians of a certain vintage will listen and blast it. They feel good about it. And it'll be nice to have a bit more of that. So like Letterkenny now is this kind of like quirky show Canadians actually appreciate, and it's really Canadian, like Ontario specific. It'd be nice if we just kind of appreciated what we are a bit more and not only kind of look south for inspiration. And Quebec is a great model of that. Now, they of course have this language barrier, and it makes it kind of a bit easier to appreciate your own. If you only speak French, or that's your main language of interest, of course you're going to consume French, and not French from France, but the French that represents you. Just a bit easier, I think, in some ways.
Well, certainly because France is far away, and the U.S. is just like close by, and all that. But I wanted to ask though, to bring it to the dreary topic of people not getting along and conflicts from far away playing out. So I don't know whether this is something you're able to answer or whether anybody, whatever, but like, how has it, like when I heard about Montreal growing up, and again, to be clear, my grandmother, who is no longer living, was born in 1920. Okay, so this was not, none of these stories are from last week. It always sounded quite anti-Semitic there. Now that there is this population of Francophone Jews in Montreal, what do they experience in terms of anti-Semitism today? Are they generally, like, I know that often Jews of that background are quite pro-Israel. Is there conflict, even if they are Francophone? How's everyone getting along? Because I feel like I only have kind of indirect understanding of this from like when I read a French language publication from Quebec, which is not as often as I should. Not never, but not often enough.
So first of all, I should say I haven't lived in Montreal in 25 years now, although I visit often and I still kind of have a finger on it a little bit. So I'm not the best person to ask about what's happening today, but I can say a little bit, and also can say a little bit about historically. So historically, I think your Bovy was I think reflecting the general ignorance of French Canadians and who were in the 1920s. This is well before the Quiet Revolution. Most Quebecers were discouraged from getting educated by the church mostly, and they were looked down upon by English-speaking people in Montreal especially, but all over Quebec. So there was just like a really much more groupie mentality, I think. And I think there were like prominent clergy who were anti-Semitic, like Lionel Gros, who's actually a metro stop is named after him, much to the dismay of many Jews because he was quite anti-Semitic. So there were, in fact, incidents of anti-Semitism. My father tells a story. I don't know if it's true. I don't know why he'd lie, but he had a storefront. This is in the 1960s, a storefront on St. Hubert Street where he was dealing with a French Canadian clientele, and one of them found out he was Jewish and literally asked him, "Where are your horns?" I don't know if that's true. That sounds crazy. But I've heard enough stories of kind of deep, like, misinformed stereotypes among French Canadians. I don't think it's untrue. But that's a long time ago.
I have friends who are French Canadian, like, and it's not like I claim to be something other than I am. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't seem to be. I just wonder, like, how it all plays out dynamics wise, because there used to be that divide where Jewish and Anglo were somewhat interchangeable, and that there would have been maybe hostility towards this group, But now but it's not
linguistic. So, I mean, first of all, let's make sure we're still accurate. So there are a lot more French, like Moroccan Jews, but it's still mostly Ashkenazi. It's still mostly English-speaking as the first language. But most Jews now in Montreal, I would gather, are bilingual, just by necessity. You have to be.
Right.
So now maybe the antipathies are less French, French versus English, but it could be French Canadian versus Jew. I think now it's not even that. I think it's really, there is a massive difference between the U.S. and Canada. And I would say it's especially different in Quebec, is our Muslim population. The Muslim population is much, much larger relative to the Jewish population in Canada. I think it's 5 times as large in Canada, relative numbers, than in the U.S. In the U.S., you're also talking about the largest faction of Muslim people are African American. So they're not like from the Middle East or the MENA. Whereas in Canada, it's mostly from the Middle East, Pakistan, North Africa. And I think there, for cultural reasons, they're just like these kind of baked in antipathies.
It's closer to like what you get in France then.
It's closer to what you get in France. Absolutely. And I think now the kinds of, especially since October 7th, the kinds of like out loud anti-Semitic things you're seeing are just more typical, Arab people from that part of the world who are, have deep anti-Israel sentiment. And of course, Jews who typically have, although not always, typically have deep pro-Israel sentiments. And that's where the conflict occurs.
I'm going to bring it closer to home for my last question, which is really close. Roncesvalles Village, Toronto, where we both live. So I just was wondering, like, when we last were talking about all of this on podcast, we were in this realm where, like, our neighborhood was just all in for freeing Palestine, whatever that might mean to each flyer poster. It could mean any number of things. We discussed this. But there has been this shift towards Canadian patriotism really all around, like you've said, like all these signs up everywhere, like Canadian flags up everywhere. Like the pet shop has like a sign that they're like not a US franchise, like as if anybody thought they were. But whatever, like that seems to have like the issue that's visually so apparent. There still is one, it's just a different one. How does that change your sort of day-to-day experience of life in this, we're going to go hyper-provincial here, intentionally, in this bit of Toronto?
Yeah, so I think it has changed quite a bit in the past years, 8 months, whatever it might be. So I'm seeing fewer of the Free Palestine signs on people's lawns, although they're still there. And in fact, one of my neighbors not only has one of these signs, but has one in Boston wood, like a permanent Free Palestine sign in her window.
I shouldn't laugh, but that is commitment. I would like for there to be peace in the region. I have not gotten anything engraved on any stance, but yes, that is commitment. Mickey, where can people find you and your work?
Yeah, so I have one of the benefits of having a unique last name is you can literally just Google my last name and you'll find me. It's typically me. Inzlicht is my last name.
Yeah, we'll also have links. We'll have links to your Substack and your About page in our show page.
Yeah, thanks. And then, I have a Substack that comes out every week called Speak Now, Regret Later, which is, the title gives away my kind of like, impulsive side. I just want to be able to speak freely. I end up writing about politics, culture. These days, a lot more about psychology. You can look it up if you're interested. Keep on reading. It'd be great.
Thanks so much for coming on The Jewish Angle.
Thanks for having me, Phoebe.
Thank you for listening to The Jewish Angle, a podcast from the Canadian Jewish News. This has been Phoebe Maltz Bovy, opinion editor of the CJN and a contributing editor of Scribe Quarterly, the CJN's print magazine. The show is produced and edited by Michael Fraiman. Our music is by Frank Freeman. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to The Jewish Angle wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.